August 17, 1943, 1,147 hours, 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. The Luftwaffe pilots who rose to intercept the American bomber formation that morning anticipated yet another easy triumph. Their Focke-Wulf 190S and Messid 190S had been cutting down unescorted B-7s for months, and intelligence reports confirmed the flying fortresses were outside the reach of any Allied fighter escort. What ascended toward them through the cloud layer would overturn every belief German fighter command held about American air power. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, 7 tons of aircraft the Luftwaffe had written off as too heavy, too short-ranged, and too unwieldy for serious fighter work, was about to redefine the rules of air dominance over Europe. The Germans referred to it as Der Jug, the Jug, ridiculing its swollen fuselage. Within months, it would earn another name, Der Holländer, the Hell Hunter. This enormous fighter, driven by an engine producing more horsepower than any German aircraft, would reshape the strategic bombing effort and cripple the Luftwaffe in ways no Allied planner had originally imagined. The intelligence breakdown had been total. During the spring of 1943, Luftwaffe operational studies had determined that effective fighter escort deep into German airspace was unattainable. The calculations appeared undeniable. Existing Allied fighters such as the Spitfire and P-38 Lightning could scarcely reach the German frontier before fuel demands forced a return. German air defenses had been structured around this core belief. Major General Adolf Galland, commanding Luftwaffe fighter forces, had constructed his entire defensive doctrine around the idea of the killing zone, the vast stretches of German sky where American bombers would travel without protection. Luftwaffe intelligence papers from May 1943, recovered after the war, described their evaluation of Allied fighter strength. The P-47 Thunderbolt received special scrutiny, and the conclusions were disastrously wrong. German intelligence placed the P-47's combat radius at roughly 175 miles, just enough to touch the Dutch coastline. Their analysis centered on the aircraft's loaded weight of 17,500 pounds. It was nearly double the mass of a Messer's Bf-109G. German aeronautical engineers working from photographs and pilot accounts determined that such a heavy machine would be slow in combat and burn fuel at rates that made deep penetration missions impossible. The technical review prepared by Reckland Test Center, the Luftwaffe's main aircraft evaluation authority, concluded that the P-47 reflected standard American engineering thinking, brute strength over grace, mass over maneuverability. The report, dated June 12, 1943, declared, "The enemy's P-47 fighter, although equipped with heavy firepower and solid structural strength, lacks the range and maneuverability required for reliable bomber escort beyond 200 kilometers from English bases. Our forces can engage American bombers without serious fighter interference once penetration surpasses this distance." This judgment would prove disastrously incorrect, yet the mistake was understandable given the intelligence available at the time. What German intelligence could not foresee was that American engineers at Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant had been quietly resolving the range issue through innovations that would fundamentally change strategic air warfare. The P-47's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine generated 2,000 horsepower, extraordinary output that did indeed consume fuel at a rapid rate. But Republic's engineering team under Alexander Kartveli had built the aircraft around a groundbreaking answer: vast internal fuel reserves combined with external drop tanks that could be discarded once empty or when combat demanded peak performance. The early P-47C variant carried 305 gal of internal fuel. The enhanced P-47D entering operational service in late 1943 raised internal capacity to 370 G. Yet the real transformation arrived with the creation of pressurized drop tanks. The initial 108 gal paper tanks were soon reinforced by 150 gal steel tanks and later by 200 gal versions. With a full external fuel load, a P-47D could carry more than 700 gallons in total, sufficient to escort bombers to targets the Germans believed entirely outside fighter reach. German intelligence had failed to anticipate this advance for a straightforward reason. They had never regarded drop tanks as a principal answer to the range problem. Luftwaffe doctrine favored internal fuel storage and aircraft designed precisely for their designated missions. The idea of a heavy fighter using disposable external fuel tanks to extend range by 400 miles or more lay beyond their tactical thinking. The first operational use of long-range P-47s left German air defenses completely off balance. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched coordinated attacks against ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and Messerschmitt production plants at Regensburg. Luftwaffe controllers tracking the incoming formations prepared for routine interception procedures, expecting short-range fighters to turn back, then to engage the bombers inside the killing zone. At 11:47 hours, units of the 56th Fighter Group flying P-47 Desi centers, fitted with 150 Galdrop tanks, appeared above Schwerin at 27,000 feet, 180 miles deep within German territory. Luftwaffe controllers at first dismissed the reports. Oberst Hannestraat, commanding JG-54, received a radio transmission from one of his pilots. "Thunderbolts over the target. Repeat, American fighters over Schweinfurt." His reply was entered into Luftwaffe communication records. "Impossible. Verify your identification." No American fighter can reach this location. What came next revealed not only the P-47's unanticipated range, but abilities that destroyed every German belief about the aircraft's combat effectiveness. The Thunderbolt pilots, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zenke of the 56th Fighter Group, had instructions to stay with the bombers until fuel usage made withdrawal absolutely unavoidable. At 11:53 hours, units of Jaguar 26 and JG-1, roughly 40 Focke-Wulf 190s, initiated their attack passes on the bomber stream. The battle that unfolded during the next 18 minutes would be examined by both Luftwaffe and Yusuf intelligence agencies for months afterward. German pilots who had expected to encounter unprotected bombers instead found themselves fighting escort fighters with startling advantages. The P-47's 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, delivered a volume of fire no German fighter could equal. Each weapon fired 800 rounds per minute, and convergence set at 300 yards produced a lethal cone of fire. Lieutenant Fritz Leutkeite, flying with JG-26, submitted one of the most detailed German descriptions of the engagement in his post-mission report, made firing pass on bomber formation from 2 o'clock high. Immediately engaged by 4 Thunderbolts, executed standard evasive dive. Enemy followed through vertical descent exceeding 6,000 m, achieved speeds estimated 750 kilometers per hour. Thunderbolt remained in pursuit throughout. This contradicts all prior intelligence concerning aircraft's diving capability. Leutkeite's account highlighted what would prove to be the P-47's most destructive tactical strength. German fighters, especially the FW-190, had depended on dive attacks to strike bombers and escape pursuit. The established Luftwaffe method against Allied fighters was straightforward. Complete the attack, then dive away at velocities enemy fighters could not follow. The P-47 not only matched these dives, it surpassed them. The physics were harshly simple. The P-47's great mass, long considered a liability in turning engagements, became a dominant advantage in vertical combat. The aircraft could reach dive speeds beyond 500 miles per hour, faster than any Luftwaffe fighter. German pilots who attempted their customary escape dives found Thunderbolts accelerating behind them, closing rapidly, and bringing those 850 caliber guns to bear. Ober Joseph Priller, commander of JG-26, submitted an urgent tactical report that evening. Enemy P-47 fighters display unforeseen performance. Range greatly exceeds intelligence projections. Aircraft retains combat effectiveness at altitudes above 8,000 meters. Most importantly, diving speed equals or surpasses our own fighters. Recommend immediate revision of engagement doctrine. Earlier assumptions regarding Thunderbolt limitations are invalid. The battle over Schweinfurt on August 17th ended with 7 Luftwaffe fighters confirmed destroyed and 4 listed as probables, against the loss of 2 P-47s. More importantly, bomber losses in the escorted sections of the mission were far lower than in areas without fighter protection. Of the 60 P-17s destroyed that day, only 11 were lost during intervals when P-47s were present. This numerical truth forced rapid changes in both American operational tactics and German defensive planning. The psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots was immediate and deep. For almost a year, they had flown with the assurance that American bombers would eventually move beyond their fighter escort. The missions were hazardous but followed familiar, predictable patterns. That certainty vanished. Radio transmissions intercepted and decoded by Allied intelligence revealed the change in German fighter morale. August 18, 1943 hours. Request verification of Thunderbolt combat radius. Yesterday's engagement occurred 290 kilometers from enemy bases. August 19, 1530, 4 hours. All units. Thunderbolts now classified as long-range escort. Modify interception timing accordingly. August 24th, 0847 7 hours. Fighter Command requests immediate technical evaluation of American drop tank capability. Current intelligence assessments proven insufficient. The technical truth behind the P-47's evolution was being sharpened with every sortie. 8th Air Force engineering officers working alongside combat reports steadily refined tactics and equipment. Drop tank construction progressed from paper to pressed steel, improving dependability and capacity. Pilots developed fuel control methods that extended range. Cruise at ideal altitude. Lean the mixture for maximum efficiency. Preserve internal fuel for combat. September 1943. Standard practice required P-47s to reach the combat zone using external tank fuel, then discard the tanks before engaging enemy aircraft. This ensured the fighter entered battle with full internal fuel, delivering maximum performance and endurance. The abandoned tanks, though costly, altered the strategic balance. Each mission penetrated farther into Germany, compelling Luftwaffe fighters to operate nearer their own airfields and reducing the time they could remain over the bombers. Before we continue, tell us where you're listening from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for you. The technical progression that followed reshaped the P-47 from a merely capable escort into a dominant air superiority fighter. Republic Aviation's constant refinements, driven directly by combat experience, produced successive versions that reached ever deeper into German airspace. The PUS 47D-25, entering service in January 1944, incorporated expanded internal fuel capacity and enhanced engine performance. Combat radius increased to 475 miles with external tanks, sufficient to reach Berlin itself. German aircraft designers struggled to counter this advance. Messrs and Focke-Wulf engineers examined captured P-47 components and questioned downed American pilots. The technical findings exposed a troubling truth. American industrial strength enabled constant refinement of existing aircraft, while Germany fought simply to sustain production of current models. A Focke-Wulf technical evaluation from December 1943 concluded, "The enemy achieves through industrial volume what we seek through engineering precision. Each month delivers improved American aircraft while our factories struggle merely to replace losses." The Thunderbolts' durability became legendary among both American crews and German attackers. The R-2800 engine, with 18 cylinders arranged in twin rows, could endure damage that would destroy German power plants. The radial layout meant that losing multiple cylinders did not automatically mean engine failure. Combat reports recorded P-47s returning to base with extreme battle damage. Cylinders torn away, oil lines cut, cowling ripped apart, yet still airborne. Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron offered the most striking case on June 26, 1943. Intercepted by Oberleutnant Egon Meyer's FW-190, Johnson's P-47 absorbed more than 200 strikes from 20 mm cannon and machine gun fire. The canopy shattered, the fuselage riddled, hydraulic systems ruined. Johnson, wounded and barely controlling the aircraft, managed to fly the crippled Thunderbolt back across the channel to England. The aircraft, later inspected by Republic engineers, displayed structural damage that should have been fatal. Yet the enormous airframe had absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lighter fighters. German intelligence summaries from mid-1944 revealed mounting frustration with the Thunderbolt's toughness. Major Heinsbar, a 220 victory ace, submitted an assessment that circulated within Luftwaffe Fighter Command. Engagement with P-47 demands ammunition expenditure 3 times greater than against Spitfire or P-38. Aircraft structure absorbs damage without critical failure. Pilots show readiness to continue combat even with visible aircraft damage. Recommend concentrating fire on cockpit areas, the only consistently vulnerable point. The strategic effect expanded as P-47 numbers grew. By March 1944, the 8th Air Force fielded more than 1,000 Thunderbolts across several fighter groups. The 4th, 56th, 78th, 352nd, 353rd, 356th, 359th, 361st and 479th Fighter Groups all operated P-47s, forming an escort force capable of shielding bomber streams for the entirety of their missions into Germany. Luftwaffe fighters, compelled to fight through layers of Thunderbolts, endured rising losses. The growing numerical strength intensified the technical advantage. German fighter pilots confronted impossible calculations. Even when favorable kill ratios were achieved, American industry replaced losses within days, while Luftwaffe replacements required weeks or even months. A captured Luftwaffe personnel report from April 1944 recorded the emergency. Pilot losses exceed replacement capacity by 40%. Experienced pilots are being lost faster than the training system can replace them. American fighter opposition now includes aircraft types and numbers that render successful bomber interception nearly impossible without unacceptable casualties. The P-47's 850 caliber machine guns were devastating in combat. Each weapon carried between 267 and 425 rounds depending on mounting position, providing roughly 30 seconds of total firing time. Convergence set at 300 yards created a deadly zone where the fire from all 8 guns intersected. Pilots who achieved correct positioning and controlled trigger use could destroy German fighters with a single burst. Gun camera film reviewed by both American and German intelligence demonstrated the effect. BF-19s and FW-190s breaking apart under concentrated fire. The psychological impact extended beyond direct combat. The unique sound of the P-47's turbo supercharger became an acoustic signature German troops learned to recognize. The high-pitched whine, audible even above other engine noise, signaled the presence of Thunderbolts before visual contact. Radio intercepts captured Luftwaffe ground controllers warning their pilots. Active turbo supercharger noise detected, multiple Thunderbolts in sector. Preparing and narrating this story required significant effort. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It truly means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evolution of American fighter tactics reached full maturity in early 1944 with the adoption of the fighter sweep. Instead of merely escorting bombers, P-47 groups began flying ahead of the bomber stream, actively seeking out Luftwaffe fighters before they could organize attacks. This tactical shift exploited the Thunderbolt's extended range while using its superior high-altitude performance. Major General William Kempner, commanding 8th Fighter Command, issued his well-known directive in January 1944. Our objective is to destroy the German Air Force in the air, on the ground, wherever it is found. The most effective way to protect our bombers is to eliminate enemy fighters before they can attack. This aggressive doctrine released P-47 groups to pursue combat rather than simply respond to threats. The consequences for the Luftwaffe were devastating. On February 20th, 1944, during big week operations aimed at German aircraft production, 8th Fighter Command reported 61 enemy aircraft destroyed. The 56th Fighter Group by itself, commanded by Colonel Hubert Zenke, was responsible for 18 confirmed victories. German loss records reviewed after the war verified 58 fighters destroyed that day, losses the Luftwaffe was unable to absorb. The ground attack role of the P-47, originally considered secondary, developed into a primary mission. The aircraft's capacity to carry up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, or 10.5 in rockets, combined with its 850 caliber guns, turned it into a formidable ground attack weapon. Pilots refined methods for hitting German airfields, rail centers, and supply columns. The heavy construction that made the P-47 durable in air combat proved just as valuable during low-level attacks through intense flak. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, the leading P-47 ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the change. We discovered the Thunderbolt could do everything. Escort bombers at 30,000 feet, dogfight German fighters, dive bomb targets, strafe trains and trucks, and bring us home through weather that would ground other aircraft. The Germans could not build anything that matched it. Across these missions, the Luftwaffe tried multiple countermeasures throughout 1944. German fighter tactics shifted to avoid the strengths of the P-47. Engage only with numerical advantage, avoid prolonged dogfights, strike quickly, and disengage. These defensive methods were an admission that German fighters no longer controlled their own airspace. Ober Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, wrote in his diary, "We have become the hunted rather than the hunters. Every mission now centers on survival rather than victory." German aircraft development efforts attempted to counter the Thunderbolt's advantages. The Follow-Wolf TAL 152, designed for extreme high-altitude performance, entered limited production in 1945. too late and in numbers too small to matter. The Messrs Me-262 jet fighter offered speed advantages, but persistent engine reliability issues and fuel shortages restricted its impact. More importantly, the Mi-262 required long takeoff and landing phases where it was vulnerable to prowling P-47s. Allied fighters destroyed more Mi-262s on the ground and during takeoff than were lost in air-to-air combat. Statistical records documented the collapse of the Luftwaffe. In January 1944, German day fighter forces totaled about 1,650 aircraft. By June 1944, despite frantic production, strength had dropped to fewer than 1,500, while losses exceeded 2,400 aircraft during those 6 months. Attrition at that level was unsustainable and hollowed out unit effectiveness. More importantly, losses of experienced pilots rose faster than training programs could replace them. The average experience of Luftwaffe fighter pilots declined from more than 200 flight hours in early 1943 to fewer than 50 hours by mid-1944. American P-47 production, meanwhile, expanded to industrial-scale levels that Germany could not match. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale and Evansville plants, together with Curtiss-Wright's Buffalo facility, produced 15,683 P-47s over the course of the war. At peak output in 1944, these factories delivered more than 1,200 Thunderbolts per month. This industrial surge meant that every P-47 lost in combat could be replaced within days. While Luftwaffe losses created permanent gaps in defensive coverage, the escort missions demonstrated the evolution and maturity of American strategic bombing doctrine. By mid-1944, bomber formations regularly reached Berlin, Peenemünde, Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and other vital targets, with P-47 escort covering most of the mission. The later addition of P-51 Mustangs for maximum range escort established a layered protective network. P-47s dominated the initial and intermediate stages of missions, while Mustangs continued to engage and support at longer ranges. The human cost of P-47 dominance was evident in both American and German records. Luftwaffe pilot memoirs and post-war interrogations revealed the psychological impact of facing an enemy with overwhelming numerical and technical advantages. German pilots described the despair of witnessing American formations darken the sky, knowing that every engagement meant confronting fighters they could neither outrun nor outlast. Hauptmann Heinz Noe, who survived the war with 33 victories, recorded in his diary the decline of German pilot morale. March 1944. Today we face perhaps 50 Thunderbolts escorting bombers to Brunswick. We are only 12 aircraft. Survival has become impossible arithmetic. May 1944. Lost. 3 pilots today, all experienced men we cannot replace. The Americans lose 10 times our numbers, yet replace them the following day. We are fighting numbers, not just planes. The physical strain on Luftwaffe pilots intensified as sortie rates climbed and rest periods shortened. German fighters often flew multiple missions daily, frequently without sufficient maintenance support or fuel for training flights. American pilots, in contrast, operated from well-supplied English bases with robust maintenance support, regular rest rotations, and extensive training programs that consistently produced replacement pilots. The role of the P-47 expanded dramatically during the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. Thunderbolt units provided continuous air cover over the Normandy beaches, conducted armed reconnaissance behind German lines, and established air superiority that prevented effective Luftwaffe interference with the landings. The 36 P-47 groups operating from England flew more than 1,400 sorties on D-Day alone, creating a protective aerial umbrella for the vulnerable invasion forces. Colonel Zenke's 56 Fighter Group showcased the P-47's versatility during Operation Overlord. On June 7th, the group flew 4 separate missions: a dawn patrol over the beachhead, a mid-morning escort for bombers attacking road junctions, an afternoon armed reconnaissance searching for German armored columns, and an evening combat air patrol. The Thunderbolts destroyed 11 German fighters, bombed 3 bridges, and strafed numerous vehicles, all while maintaining protective coverage over Allied ground forces. The Luftwaffe's attempt to respond to the invasion highlighted their weakened condition. German fighter forces managed only 319 sorties on D-Day, compared with more than 14,000 Allied sorties. Ober-Joseph Priller's famous solo attack on Sword Beach, immortalized in The Longest Day, occurred in part because his unit, JG-26, could field only 2 serviceable fighters that morning. The entire Luftwaffe fighter force in France numbered fewer than 300 operational aircraft on June 6th. Facing over 5,000 Allied fighters, including 18 P-47 groups, the ground support mission revealed another facet of the Thunderbolts' impact. Throughout the Normandy campaign and subsequent operations across France, P-47s acted as flying artillery, destroying German armor, vehicles, and fortifications. Their .50 caliber API, armor-piercing incendiary rounds, could penetrate light armor and ignite vehicles. Rockets and bombs demolished hardened positions. German ground forces came to fear the appearance of Thunderbolts as much as their fighter pilots did. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, specifically acknowledged the P-47's role in his post-invasion assessment. The Thunderbolt fighter bombers proved invaluable in supporting ground operations. Their ability to deliver heavy ordnance while also providing air cover created an unprecedented level of tactical air support. It's a ka! German forces were effectively pinned during daylight hours. Unable to maneuver or resupply without risking devastating air attacks, P-47s operated with near impunity over German territory in the final months of 1944. Luftwaffe fighter forces, weakened by losses and fuel shortages, rarely challenged American air superiority. Thunderbolts struck across Germany, targeting transportation networks, oil facilities, and airfields. The destruction of German synthetic fuel production proved especially decisive. Without fuel, the Luftwaffe could neither train pilots nor operate the aircraft they still produced. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 offered a final demonstration of air power's decisive role. When weather cleared on December 23rd, allowing air operations, P-47s and other Allied fighters tore into German armored columns advancing through the Ardennes. The Thunderbolts, operating from forward bases in France and Belgium, carried out close support missions that destroyed tanks, supply vehicles, and troop concentrations. German forces, who had assumed winter weather would ground Allied aircraft, found themselves exposed to the same aerial devastation that had decimated their forces throughout 1944. The technical specifications that made the P-47 dominant highlight the engineering philosophy that won the air war. The R-2800 double wasp engine, built by Pratt & Whitney, was arguably the most reliable aircraft engine of World War II. Its 18 cylinders, arranged in 2 rows of 9, displaced 2,840 cubic inches and produced 2,000 horsepower at war emergency settings. More importantly, the engine could sustain combat damage and continue functioning, a trait that saved countless pilots' lives. The turbo supercharger system, constructed by General Electric, allowed the P-47 to maintain performance at extreme altitudes. By compressing thin, high-altitude air and forcing it into the engine at pressures that preserved sea-level power output, the Thunderbolt retained full combat capability even above 30,000 feet, while German fighters lost effectiveness in the thin air beyond 25,000 feet. The P-47 remained fully operational to 40,000 feet and higher. The aircraft's armament embodied American firepower philosophy taken to its extreme. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, each capable of firing 750 to 850 rounds per minute, produced a weight of fire unmatched by any other fighter. While the .50 caliber round was smaller than the 20 cannons mounted on German aircraft, it proved devastatingly effective. High velocity, a flat trajectory, and reliable operation made gunnery easier, while generous ammunition capacity allowed sustained engagements. Ammunition load varied by position. The outer guns carried 267 rounds each, while the inner guns held up to 425 rounds, providing a total of 3,400 rounds. In practice, this allowed approximately 30 to 35 seconds of continuous firing, enough for multiple engagement opportunities. Gun camera footage demonstrated that skilled pilots rarely needed more than 2 to 3 second bursts to destroy enemy aircraft. The structural design emphasized pilot survival over agility. The P-47's airframe used heavy-gauge aluminum that could absorb remarkable battle damage. The radial engine acted as a natural armor barrier for the pilot. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plates behind and beneath the pilot's seat, and a bulletproof windscreen all contributed to survivability. Statistics compiled by the 8th Air Force showed that P-47 pilots had significantly higher survival rates when shot down compared to pilots of lighter fighters. The combat record of P-47 units highlights their overwhelming dominance. The 56th Fighter Group, the top-scoring P-47 unit, claimed 674.5 aerial victories and destroyed over 300 aircraft on the ground. The 4th Fighter Group added 550 aerial victories before transitioning to P-51 Mustangs in early 1944. Across all theaters, P-47s were credited with 3,752 aerial victories against roughly 3,500 losses from all causes, a favorable exchange ratio even before accounting for the thousands of ground targets destroyed. Individual ace performances further illustrated the P-47's capabilities. Colonel Zenke achieved 17.75 victories, all in P-47s. Lieutenant Colonel Gabreski scored all 28 of his European victories in Thunderbolts. Captain Robert Johnson claimed 27 victories without ever being shot down. These pilots, along with hundreds of others, demonstrated that in skilled hands, the P-47 could dominate any opponent. The German perspective, documented in Luftwaffe records and post-war interrogations, acknowledged the P-47's decisive role in their defeat. General Adolf Galland wrote in his post-war memoirs, "The appearance of long-range American fighters over Germany marked the beginning of our end in the air. The Thunderbolt, which we initially dismissed as too heavy for effective combat, proved to be a formidable opponent we could neither escape nor outlast." Combined with American numerical superiority and unlimited fuel supplies, it created conditions we could not overcome. The success of the strategic bombing campaign depended fundamentally on the P-47's ability to protect bombers during critical phases of their missions. While the P-51 Mustang received more publicity for its longer range, it was the P-47 that bore the burden of establishing air superiority during the crucial 1943-1944 period. Without the Thunderbolt's ability to escort bombers deep into German territory and dominate German fighters in combat, the campaign might have failed. The industrial achievement behind P-47 production matched its combat success. Republic Aviation's factories, staffed in part by women as men entered military service, maintained production schedules that had seemed impossible before the war. Quality control remained exceptional despite the rapid output, a testament to both American industrial capability and the design's inherent robustness. The final assessment of the P-47's impact on World War II goes beyond statistics and technical specifications to the fundamentals of industrial warfare. The Thunderbolt embodied American industrial philosophy applied to aerial combat. Build it heavy, build it strong, build it in overwhelming numbers, and back it with unlimited resources. This philosophy directly opposed the European design approach, which emphasized elegance, efficiency, and refinement. German engineers entered the war with technically sophisticated fighters, optimized for maximum performance. The Bf-109 and FW-190 represented the peak of late 1930s aeronautical engineering, light, agile, and powerful for their size. They dominated early war combat, piloted by highly trained aviators operating under doctrine refined through experience in the Spanish Civil War. The P-47 succeeded not by elegance, but by practicality. It could be flown effectively by average pilots and still achieve results. It could sustain damage and keep fighting. It carried enough fuel to reach any target in Europe. Its firepower was sufficient to destroy any opponent. Most importantly, it could be produced in numbers that overwhelmed any German response. This marked a fundamental shift in military aviation, from artisan craftsmanship to industrial warfare. The psychological impact of this shift was evident in the experiences of both American and German pilots. American pilots, confident that their aircraft were backed by unlimited industrial support, could focus entirely on completing missions. Maintenance problems were solved quickly, and combat damage meant returning to base for a new aircraft. This security enhanced combat effectiveness. German pilots, by contrast, faced each mission knowing it might be their last. Damaged aircraft might not be replaced, and the numerical advantage of the Allies increased daily. This despair eroded their combat effectiveness more than any technical disadvantage. The bomber crews whose lives were saved by P-47 escort provided the clearest testimony to the aircraft's value. 8th Air Force bomber losses dropped sharply once long-range fighter escort became available. Before long-range fighters, deep penetration missions were nearly suicidal. With P-47s, survival rates improved dramatically. Tens of thousands of American airmen survived the war because Thunderbolts kept German fighters away from their bombers. The post-war career of the P-47 confirmed its enduring design. The aircraft served in air forces worldwide into the 1960s, flying combat missions in Korea and with numerous other nations. While the P-51 earned more fame, the P-47 proved more versatile and adaptable to evolving mission requirements. Its ground attack capability extended its usefulness long after its primary air superiority role ended. The legacy of the P-47 carries into modern air combat doctrine. It demonstrated that true air superiority requires more than technical excellence. It requires practicality, resilience, industrial backing, and overwhelming support. Air superiority depends on numbers, logistics, training, and industrial support. Modern air forces still struggle to balance aircraft sophistication with procurement quantity. The lesson of the P-47 remains clear. Sometimes an adequate aircraft produced in quantity defeats the perfect aircraft available in limited numbers. The German assumption that American fighters could not reach Germany proved catastrophically wrong, underestimating both American engineering ingenuity and industrial capacity. While the Luftwaffe planned for the war they expected, American forces created the war they needed to win. The P-47 Thunderbolt, initially dismissed as too heavy and too short-ranged, became the weapon that shattered German air power and secured Allied victory in Europe's skies. The 15,683 P-47s produced during the war were more than aircraft. They embodied a philosophy of warfare: overwhelming force over refined elegance, practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection, and achievable mass production over unattainable excellence. The Germans never anticipated the P-47 because they could not imagine that such an approach could succeed. Their traditional military expectations failed to account for the revolutionary nature of American industrial warfare. The waves of Thunderbolts that darkened German skies from 1943 onward did more than defeat the Luftwaffe. They proved that modern warfare belonged to those who could apply industrial capacity to military purpose. The psychological impact of facing endless American formations, where each loss was replaced within days and every pilot backed by unlimited fuel and ammunition, was as decisive as any technical advantage. Victory went not to the most sophisticated fighter, but to the nation that could build adequate fighters in overwhelming numbers and sustain them with unlimited resources. The final mission flown by 8th Air Force P-47s took place on May 7, 1945, the day before Germany's surrender. Even in victory, Thunderbolts patrolled German skies, a fitting conclusion for the aircraft that transformed air warfare and shattered every German assumption about American fighter capabilities. The Hell Hunters had earned their name, and the Luftwaffe had learned too late that American industrial might, properly applied, could overcome any defensive strategy.